My name is Dr. Kelvin Shikuku. I work with the International Livestock Research Institute as an economist. At ILRI, I kind of lead several streams of research, the main one being around index-based livestock insurance, or also what we call IBLI, in short. And so I'm currently implementing several projects aimed at promoting uptake of livestock insurance, but also assessing impacts of livestock insurance. The other piece of work that I do revolves around use of information systems, or basically designing dryland information systems that can help us to monitor shocks in the drylands, but also disseminate information to pastoralists so that they can use that to improve the decision making. Yeah, so maybe I start by explaining what it is, because because that's important, and often there's a misunderstanding about what it is. So IBLI, as I said, stands for Index-Based Livestock Insurance. Index-based meaning it is different from the conventional, or what other people call indemnity insurance. Indemnity insurance requires that losses, someone has to verify the losses, actual losses, before a claim can be made and before people can receive a payout. Index insurance, on the other hand, uses an objective index, right, or variable. In the case of livestock insurance, we use something we call Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. This index correlates with the loss, so which means that you don't need to look at the actual losses. You just need to look at this objective index, and since it correlates with the losses, it kind of addresses some of the issues that the conventional product faces. And so another thing that I wanted to mention in relation to index-based livestock insurance, it's that it's an asset protection policy as opposed to asset replacement policy. So what do I mean by that? In asset protection, you, as I said, we look at the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. That tells us within a certain season, and typically we monitor the rainy seasons, so long rains, but also the short rains. So you look at within a season, monitor pasture conditions using, again, the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. If the pasture conditions within that season and within that carefully defined unit area, which we call a unit area of insurance, if it falls below a certain predetermined threshold, then a trigger is pulled. Once a trigger is pulled, then a report is provided to the insurance companies, and they make payment directly to the policy holders. So that's how that product works. And so in that sense, it's not an investment, right? People have to pay a premium in anticipation that, of course, there's going to be an event, right? A risky event, in this case, drought. But in the event that there's no drought, then they don't expect the premium back, right? But if there's a drought, and as I said, in the event of severe drought, then a payout is made, and people can use that to purchase fodder. People can use the payout to buy medicine and water, inputs that can help protect the animal from dying. So that's why it's an asset protection, because as opposed to asset replacement, which would have meant that people get a payout so that they can replace animals that have died. The objective here is not to replace for animals that have died, but to protect the animals from dying. And so in that sense, IBLI is therefore also a kind of an anticipatory action intervention, right? Because you monitor the rainy season, you predict what the pasture availability is likely to be in the dry season. Payouts are availed earlier in the dry season, so before the animals die, so that people can buy the inputs that I mentioned. One lesson is that we've seen that payouts are used by pastoralists in different ways. As I mentioned, the intention is that payouts can be used to buy medicine and water and fodder and other inputs to protect the animal. But the way the product is designed, it doesn't limit pastoralists in ways in which they will spend their payout. Right? It's up to them. And so we find that evidence when we assess impacts of IBLI, and here I'm talking about rigorous evidence coming from kind of several years of panel data sets, show that IBLI has contributed significantly towards reducing food insecurity, and so also reducing malnutrition. It has contributed towards increasing incomes. It has contributed towards reducing poverty, or breaking what other people call poverty traps. And we see that it has also crowded in investment in other inputs, right? So people kind of get the payout and invest in medicine and other productivity enhancing inputs. And so in that sense, we've overall seen that IBLI improves the livelihoods of people. In a recent paper that is coming out very soon in Applied Economic Perspectives and Policy, we find that index insurance contributes actually to reducing downside risk associated with revenue. And that's important because often when people think about index insurance more broadly, I mean livestock insurance, but also even in the crop space, the issue that pops up is around basis risk, which basically means that although the index is designed to correlate with the losses, that correlation is not perfect. And so sometimes you might find situations where the disaster doesn't happen, the shock doesn't happen, but the index says that people should be compensated. So in that case, that might be harmful to the insurance companies, right? But we also have situations where drought can happen or a shock might happen, but the index says otherwise. So in that case, the policyholders don't get compensated. And that can be can have serious welfare implications because remember when people paid the premium, they transferred that income from kind of, one state to another, right? And so they don't have that money. They had hoped there would be a compensation. So when it doesn't happen, yet a shock has occurred, that can really be welfare reducing. What we find in this paper that I mentioned is that despite the presence of basis risk that is that kind of index products suffer from, it still contributes significantly to addressing downside risk, and that we find that it's of economic relevance. When we do a simple cost-benefit analysis. Yeah, taps a bit on what I talked about basis risk, because that remains one of the biggest issues we struggle with. Other issues revolve around how do we make the product commercially viable, right? How do we ensure that there's a cost-effective way of delivering the product at the last mile to pastoralists. And all these issues are important. It's not like you can address one and hope that that the product would work very well, right? You have to think of an approach that targets to address these issues in a more holistic way, which means you have to think about the partnerships that are required, etc. And so it's not sufficient. It's not a perfect product. One of the things, therefore, that I strongly think we should be doing is thinking about ways we can bundle livestock insurance with other services, other inputs, so could be financial, could be non-financial services, in ways that create a clear value proposition both to the service providers, so on the supply side, right, so insurance companies, but also to the pastoralists, or on the demand side, or the policyholders, if you like. And so, there are many ways you can think about bundling. You can think about, I talked about IBLI crowding in investment in other inputs, but now we are thinking about kind of deliberate ways of bundling insurance with other inputs. In other work that I'm implementing with the University of California, Davis, we look at ways in which we can even bring in insurance in a setup where people are already adopting saving schemes, for example. And so we have a project where people have been encouraged to form savings groups. They have been trained, they have been paired with mentors to help them develop that savings culture, develop commitment devices. Insurance then comes in to kind of strengthen that kind of structure. Yeah. So there are many ways that we can bundle. People have also explored how insurance could be bundled with credit. But all I'm saying is that in my perspective, I think moving forward, it's going to be difficult to rely on insurance as a panacea. I think this is one of the misunderstandings that people have. Often people think when we have insurance, we shouldn't be doing anything else. My take is that we still need to consider that in the setups where insurance is implemented, there are other risk management options that pastoralists are implementing, and we need to be careful not to erode those. So that would be my thinking around how can we make livestock insurance even more effective. The other issue would be on the supply side, as I said, the agency network. We need to think about how insurance companies will be able to deliver this product at the last mile. How do we strengthen their capacity to play that role in a way that is more sustainable? Contexts are changing very fast. We are now seeing shocks happening more frequent. When they happen, they also take a longer period before they disappear. So the duration is prolonged, and the intensity of those shocks has also increased. And this means that even though some years back insurance as a standalone was effective, because of this rapidly changing context, we have to rethink how we want to implement insurance schemes. That means we have to go back and ask ourselves, when we look at what I call unit areas of insurance as defined, many years back, are they still kind of suitable for the in the current context? We have now issues also around invasive species, etc. But for me, what is also important is that often when we monitor shocks, because as you said, these things are happening very fast, there is a tendency for people to only focus on major shocks, and in this case only droughts. That they're happening now every 2 to 3 years. And so you can think of designing a study that tells us what's happening 2020 to 2022/23, and then wait and do another study maybe 2-3 years later. But the truth is that in between, there are many things that are changing in a dynamic way, and they reinforce the impacts of those major shocks. And those are things that are affecting markets. They're things that are affecting the way rangelands are performing, and even at the household level. So one innovative way, and kind of speaks to the research that I'm doing, we started an approach called CASNet, where we use citizen science and crowdsourcing techniques to monitor shocks at markets level, at rangelands level, and also at household level at a fairly high frequency. So we are talking about weekly data collection here. Our contributors go to these places. We've constructed transect sites, 100-meter long distance in the drylands, different places. And our contributor goes there every week. It has a very clear starting point and end point. They take pictures every 10 meters. And when we analyze those pictures, which are geo-tagged, we can tell how pasture conditions are changing. And of course, that information is therefore relevant also to the insurance companies as a way of ground truthing what the situations look on the ground. At the markets level, we look at what's happening in terms of market prices, in terms of livestock body conditions, and in terms of even the volumes of livestock for different species. Because as pasture conditions are changing rapidly, that also influences the species composition of livestock. And so by monitoring what's happening in the market, we can also have a way of understanding how those things are changing. And the other piece that I wanted to highlight is, again, a recognition of how rapid these contexts are changing. We have implemented research where we partnered with an organization that had implemented a graduation program that targeted to provide pastoralists and women pastoralists with some startup capitals to start a business of their choice. And so they worked with mentors for about 18 months. After that, they kind of graduate, and the organization goes to form other groups. So this is the BOMA project. Now, what they observed was that when drought happened, the businesses that women had built were quickly depleted. They could not stand those shocks. And so they approached us, so we started to discuss about a collaboration that can kind of couple asset protection with asset building, so that the assets that the women had accumulated, instead of them getting depleted in the presence of shocks, they can kind of continue, growing on a kind of sustainable pathway. And so that's what we did. We then embedded an insurance product within that graduation program. We tailored the, speaking about resilience, because that's another point that is often missed, is that we assume that we look at the aggregate impacts in those places, but there's a lot of heterogeneity that exists by different social groups, men, women, youth, etc. Here we did kind of a deliberate effort to target women and find ways to kind of design an insurance product that speaks to the needs of women. So how do you design an insurance product that doesn't necessarily require women to own livestock, but can still protect, the businesses they have in the presence of shocks, and it's also indexable. So we came up with this product we call selling insurance in family units, as opposed to selling insurance in tropical livestock units, and which women found that spoke to their needs and the risk that they face more, and so uptake was higher among women. And so now we are in the process of assessing what the impacts are on different outcomes. Yeah. Within Spark, we have a very specific project for implementing, and which I lead, called Dirisha. It's more or less what I've talked about. The idea being that we use high-frequency crowdsourced data to monitor indicators in a multidimensional way. Shocks, but also resilience indicators in a dynamic way. So that's where our research fits within the markets and livelihood theme of Spark, although we connect to other themes, for example, the innovation theme, the resilience theme as well. But that's how we come in through this project, which is being implemented. When we started, it was largely implemented in northern Kenya. But then in the last year or so, we've mostly been using Spark funding to implement the work in southern Ethiopia, where we not only collect the data from the pastoralists and by the pastoralists, but also we disseminate the information back to them in near real time. So it's almost, you can think that if we were looking at market information this week, as soon as it arrives, it's summarized in very simple dashboards, and pastoralists can then use that information for their own decision making. Two key takeaways in this AgriFin annual learning forum has, one is that there's increasing recognition that there's no silver bullet to addressing the issues that farmers and pastoralists face, and that it's going to require partnerships and innovation to address those issues. I joined one discussion at a table where it came out very clearly that the role of research in kind of developing innovative solutions to tackling challenges that farmers and pastoralists are facing is going to be important, and we shouldn't ignore that. I think lastly is the second point has been around really thinking about how investment could be increased, especially in places that tend to be perceived as being risky, but also because of the narratives that have been kind of developed without data. So I think that one of the other key takeaways has been that there's need for data and more evidence to inform proper narratives, that will help provide accurate information for unlocking financing in places such as the Drylands.